Welcome to the Holistic Growth Podcast, navigating business and natural health and functional medicine, where we bring you insights and strategies to help grow your practice and amplify your impact. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Holistic Growth Podcast. I'm Dr. Tracey. I'm the Chief Health and Growth Officer right here at Get Healthy Store, who hosts and sponsors this podcast. And I'm so excited to bring on an amazing educator and also healthcare professional that is now in an incredible brand called Resbiotic. Such a great new innovative product out there is available on your Get Healthy Store catalog. But Kara Seidman is with me today. She is the Director of Partnerships, along with everything else at this brand. So Kara, I'm so glad to have you back. Thanks for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Well, we're going to be talking about the microbiome, the gut axis, even the gut-lung axis. We have so many things to talk about, and just helping our practitioners understand this brand a little bit because it's pretty unique and innovative in the industry. So I'm really excited to learn. But first, I want to learn more about you. So why don't you give me a little bit of background on who you are and how you got here?
Well, I'll keep it short and sweet. But yeah, I'm a registered dietitian by trade. And I always say I came through very conventionally and worked in the hospital, worked in various settings, sort of landed myself in outpatient counseling, building different programs, diabetes programs, but really found my calling in gastrointestinal health and started a sort of integrative functional nutrition clinic within an allopathic GI group, which was very, and still to this day, very unique. I don't think they really understood all that, we could do as a dietitian, but I was with them for, almost 9 years until I moved over, and I've worked with, various microbiome companies, from Microbiome Labs to Pendulum, and now at Resbiotic. And so love taking all this integrative and functional knowledge, especially in the gastrointestinal space, and working with great companies that are putting forth, innovative products, but also really standing by research. And that's what I'm so excited about Resbiotic and sort of how we're rooted and founded in deep scientific rigor. And so I'm excited to talk a little bit more about that today.
Well, I love the fact that you were a clinician too. I think that brings a lot of, for me personally, I'm like, oh, she understands, she gets it. So you were looking for better, bigger things that could really optimize your patient-less health. So I really appreciate that. And like a lot of clinicians, you kind of find yourself within the brand educational platform, and then all of a sudden you're into all of it, the science, the formulation, the clinical trials. And so that seems to be your path. So I just wanted to set that out there for everyone listening, because you have been on both sides of utilizing products within your clinical practice, and then also over here where you're in the science and research part of it on behalf of all of us. So really appreciate that.
Yeah, I just want to add, I love that because I don't even think I could have made this transition unless I had that deep clinical experience. I really think it would have been a really difficult transition.
Yeah, and that I think is what's going to set this brand apart. Not a lot of brands have deep clinical experience and people at the head
Yeah.
helping clinicians understand from a clinical aspect. Like that clinical application is so important. How to use it, how much, how long, what for. That's what we need as practitioners. So I really appreciate your heading up education over there and doing all the things. So it's going to be amazing. Give us a little background on this company. Where did Resbiotic come from?
Yeah, so Resbiotic, I think it's an interesting story. We were really born out of our founder, Dr. Vivek Lal. He's a double board certified neonatologist, actually, who found himself in early microbiome research, and specifically in the lung microbiome. I mean, really at the start of kind of where I always say, like, the lung microbiome is unique because it wasn't even included in the Human Microbiome Project. And so he's one of those early researchers that discovered that the lung was not a sterile place. And through his deep research and education, he's an entrepreneur at spirit. He started a company that was focused on bringing pharmaceutical FDA regulated drugs to the market related to lung health using live microbiome or live biotherapeutics, and kind of realized during that process of creating a drug, which is incredibly long and expensive, and they're still working on this, decided to start Resbiotic, which is our supplement part of the business, using these clinically researched strains, our proprietary strains, all of our strains are patented, to really get products, kind of watching, he's very allopathic. I always say it's like such an interesting transition of being an allopathic physician, but realizing the space and how the biotic space was growing, and wanting to get these clinically validated and efficacious strains to people who need them most. I think the respiratory space is interesting. There's really, when it comes to any type of new drug development in the respiratory space, it's probably the longest process out of any other systems. And so I think, in his mind, he's like, these work. We have incredible research to back this. We want to get it to people to help them really at the root. And so resbiotic was born out of sort of that passion. And we've sort of built this platform of what we call the gut X axis, this understanding of the microbiome is your foundation. And if anyone's ever listened to me educate, I use that analogy quite a bit, like the foundation of a home. You can have the most beautiful home. It's everything you've ever wanted. But if there's cracks in that foundation, right, we all wait very patiently for that inspection report to come back. If there's cracks in your foundation, then that home is not going to be as resilient or stable. And so we really view the microbiome, and we now understand this interconnectedness and bidirectional relationship that exists from the microbiome to other systems of the body. And I think this is really where integrative and functional medicine is rooted. We look at the whole person, but allopathic conventional medicine still looks at this sort of systems base, right? We have our cardiovascular system, and that's very unique to our respiratory system, which is unique to our digestive tract, and we don't talk about it within one another. And the microbiome is that key piece that helps us integrate all these systems to one another.
Yeah, it's like the geodetic map of
Yeah.
the body, right? It's where everything travels and how it communicates and taking the right exit. And it's really unique that it came out of the lung microbiome. Like I
Mm-hmm.
really think that's fascinating. I mean, understandably, as a neonatal, right, he would probably deal with a lot of those
Yep.
issues with infants. But I just think that's very fascinating. And you don't think of the microbiome in the lung.
Yep.
So I don't know, it's going to be an interesting conversation. So let's get into understanding the microbiome. Can you just give us high level explanation? I'm sure practitioners understand it, but maybe not from the perspective of what resbiotic is trying to communicate. And then let's get into this gut and lung axis. So give us a little kind of high level overview of
Yeah.
the microbiome.
So the microbiome, we often use the terms microbiota, microbiome interchangeably. Your microbiota are all the living microorganisms, which include bacteria and fungi and viruses and eukaryotes, that encompass all of their genes and materials within a specific environment, which is the microbiome. So the human microbiome, I mean, we are essentially more microbial than we are human. But our gut microbiome is the largest, most dense microbiome within the human body. But we have microbiomes in really almost everywhere. They really, your blood, your urine, your lungs, your eye, your brain. We're discovering these unique communities in really all aspects of the body. We really, we once, the lungs, for example, it was always thought it was a sterile place, but it's in fact not. So it's a much smaller microbiome. We know the gut microbiome houses the most bacteria. And so this is really the sort of central command or gateway to the rest of the body. And I don't think there's a condition out there now, and at least from what I can tell in the research, that isn't somehow linked back or rooted back to what's going on in the gut microbiome.
Wow. Yeah, I was kind of reading up a little bit before the podcast about, the lung microbiome and disease, like the dysbiosis.
Yep.
I mean, rooted in asthma, COPD,
Yep.
cystic fibrosis, lung cancer, pneumonia is all a dysbiosis and an opportunistic bacteria that is overcoming that normal, healthy microbiota of the lung. We
And
don't
I
think of it that way.
and even more so, think about COVID, right? And COVID now, there's so
I
much
wasn't going
research.
to go there, but I'm glad.
I mean, I think where some of the research and really where this idea, because COVID has been sort of linked back to a microbiome disorder, and especially long COVID. But even if we think about the lungs, like why can one person get COVID or get pneumonia or RSV and be perfectly fine and resilient, and another person end up in the hospital? And so that's really what's kind of sparked this interest of understanding the sort of intricate pathways and the bidirectional relationship, because the more dysbiotic we are, the more imbalance that's going on in the microbiome. And we can talk about all those things that sort of wreak havoc on our foundation. But the more dysbiotic and imbalanced we are, then the more inflammatory compounds or the lack of production of key components like short chain fatty acids get delivered to all these essential places in the body. And so it's bidirectional. People that have asthma, people that have COPD, have dysfunctional or imbalance that's noted in specific microbial signatures or profiles. But if you have a dysbiotic microbiome, then you're not sending those right signals to the lungs. And so this is why a lot of times, in sepsis, for example, we go into acute respiratory distress. It's because we've got high amounts of lipopolysaccharides, which are inflammatory components on our bacteria. And when you have a dysfunctional gut microbiome, you have a dysfunctional barrier, your fence posts have all been knocked out. Well, now those LPSs can translocate and can be delivered to all parts of the body. We see multi-system organ failure, but we see LPSs showing up in the lungs. And so this has really kind of set the stage for research and moving forward in finding, not just targeted, but really precision therapeutics that can target these very systems. And that's where we focus our formulation and our research on is precision, innovative biotics, from prebiotics to probiotics to postbiotics, and how they're targeting these systems that we know are imbalanced and driving dysfunction.
Awesome. Well, let's get into a few specific products.
Yeah.
Okay.
Love that.
Let's just start with the line and just some highlights of what you want to cover with each product. How's that sound?
I
That
love
way
that.
practitioners can learn. All right, so I'll let you start, pick the product. Let's talk about it. How does it play in? Because you talk about prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics. Let's start there first.
Yep.
High level, explain the difference to our audience so that they have an understanding, and then let's get into the product protocols and things that we would be recommended.
Yeah, I love the biotics space. I just think with all this advanced DNA technology and ability to study, we just now truly can intimately and intricately understand what these bugs are doing. So prebiotics, I'll start there. These are your fertilizer for growth. They feed your probiotics. They're not live microorganisms, and they come generally from the diet or dietary compounds, primarily your plant-based compounds, your fibers and your polyphenols. And unfortunately, these are things that are very much lacking in the diet. We know that less than 7% of Americans actually consume sufficient amounts of fibers. And so we're faced with a lot of problems out there that our diet's not feeding those probiotics, which are the live microorganisms that have beneficial characteristics, especially when taken in large quantities. They confer benefits on the human host. And so probiotics, I think, I don't know, you have to be living under a rock if you've not heard the term probiotics. But where we're really moving in the microbiome research, and where I think there's a lot of companies and a lot of different, big microbiome researchers out there that really discuss this quite often, is when we get down to that strain. And I'll kind of talk about what that means, but the strain of your probiotic determines the function. And so what is strain? If we think about bacteria, and we have lactobacillus, right? And think about one that most people have probably heard of, Lactobacillus acidophilus. That is your genus, right? And your species. So when it comes to taxonomic hierarchy, taking us all back to our biology class, there's sort of a three-part nomenclature that when it comes to naming your species and then your strain, you have your genus, species, and then strain, which will usually be some sort of number, letter sort of combination. And I use the analogy of, like, if you think of a terrier, right? How many different types of terriers are out there? You've got a West Highland Terrier and you've got a Yorkie, right? A Yorkshire Terrier. And I'm using those examples because I've had those dogs in my life. And West Highland Terriers, they look different, they act different, they're completely different than your Yorkshire Terrier. And that is exactly how it goes to our bacteria, right? You can have Lactobacillus acidophilus, and then you can take a Lactobacillus acidophilus, let's say, RSB 12. This is one of our L. acidophilus strains. That strain determines the function. What is that bug going to do, and what is it targeting? So you cannot extrapolate the research, say, that we've done on our Lactobacillus acidophilus RSB 12 to a different L. acidophilus strain or species. And so I really question companies that don't list out those strains, because from a quality standpoint, how are you able to really understand the claims or the function of what they're doing? And I think that that's a big movement that's happening because we have the ability to understand functionality of the bugs. What are they doing in the body, or what are they supposed to do? And so I think that's very important. And similar to postbiotics, the term postbiotics is evolving actually. There's newer definitions. We previously thought of postbiotics as those bioactive compounds like butyrate, right? What your bacteria produce or cell components of specific bugs that have some targeted function. But postbiotics are actually purposefully heat inactivated or heat treated probiotics.
This episode is brought to you by Myos MD. What if there was a natural way to reduce the muscle loss we all experience with age? Let me introduce you to Myos MD. Myos MD is a powerfully unique supplement designed to reduce muscle loss, whether it's through aging, injury, illness, or weight loss. The secret? Fortitropin, an all-natural bioactive compound developed by top scientists and researched at some of the world's finest institutions. Here's how it works. Fortitropin has been clinically shown to lower myostatin, increase muscle protein synthesis, and reduce anabolic resistance. In fact, in a double-blind, placebo-controlled study at the University of California, Berkeley, men and women aged 60 to 75 saw an impressive 18% increase in muscle protein synthesis with Fortitropin compared to a placebo. And subjects saw these results with no additional exercise. This isn't just a supplement, it's science in action, helping your patients build muscle, recover faster, and live powerfully. To learn more about the research and benefits of Myos MD, visit myosmd.com today.
So they're not quite dead, but they're still viable, but they're not replicating or multiplicating within the body. And so what's so unique about postbiotics is they're very targeted in what they're doing and how they're functioning. They're very stable. They're supporting the sort of overall ecosystem, but you're not putting in live probiotics. And so I think postbiotics are truly, hear it here first. I think this is the movement of the future that we're going to see in the biotics space. I think postbiotics are very exciting because it allows us to be more targeted and more precision in our product formulation and what we really want to get from these bugs and these probiotics. So high level, I would say that's the key differences between our biotics.
It's awesome. So I think you made a really good point on the function of each strain. I think the probiotic industry initially was like, hey, trust us. Everyone needs probiotics.
Yeah.
Then you had multi-strain and then really high colony forming unit strains that had multi-strains. And, people would take probiotics and not get the result and be like, well, these don't work. I took this and it didn't help me. And other people would be like, this is the most amazing probiotic. And so I think the key difference is just understanding what's in the formula.
Yep.
That brands have a specific goal when they are formulating. I think there's a lot more research now, a lot more research available than there was just 10 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
And, I also think the probiotic industry came out hot and heavy. And honestly, the first formulation put to market was by Dr. Jeffrey Bland and Natasha Trenev. And Natasha is known as the mother of probiotics. She actually brought the kefir industry to the United States when she was 19 years old. So she owns a line of probiotics and has a very high standard. She set all the food standards. So pretty interesting to see the evolution of this. And then I think there was a lot of focus on the gut, a lot of focus on formulas, and then it wasn't sexy anymore. And something else hit the market, right? And so for the last decade, I really feel that gut health is in there, right? It's in there. It's in the protocol. It's in the testing. It's in there. But there's no really good education for practitioners to be like, let's understand the strains. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of strains, and probably you could never learn them all proficiently. But I think understanding the formulas that you use and the how and why behind them is essential in the proper positioning of what people need. I'm personally thinking about this probiotic right now for a current situation that I'm in with a friend for lung. Why are we not giving this to all kids with asthma and all people that have COPD and
Yep.
all people that have had pneumonia, especially those that have had pneumonia and have had antibiotic use?
Yep.
Because we know that bacteria are opportunistic, right? So one bacteria is going to try to take over. So if you
Yep.
have pneumonia and you have a bacteria that the antibiotic might kill, the antibiotic didn't build up the other probiotics that are in that was supposed to resist this bacteria in the first place. So
No.
to repopulate. So this is a
Yep.
super important thing. Again, I go back to the fascination of the lung, but I digress.
Yep. And we'll talk there. And I think this is important because obviously, with the ability to study and intricately, as I always say, know these strains, I really truly think we're shifting from like the kitchen sink probiotic, throw as many strains into a capsule as possible. And I challenge this because there's been research that's done that, when bacteria come into the body, they're competing for nutrients. And so there's been plenty of research done on individual strain benefits, individual benefits of probiotics. And then when you throw them into a capsule, they negate each other because they're competing for that same sort of ecological niche. And we're moving beyond really this idea of like, you need to reseed because we don't know yet. In the current research, and there are big researchers out there looking at this, we don't really know why certain strains of bacteria will seed or colonize and why some don't. And there's a lot of obviously compounding factors from, our diet to our environment. And I think that, what we're doing at Resbiotic is really in line with the movement of where just about everything is going, which is precision. You got to treat the patient and the person for what they're dealing with, and it's going to be different. I mean, we joke around our Resb lung support probiotic is good for anyone who breathes. We breathe, more than 20,000 times a day. And if you think about the air that we're breathing, I mean, more than 130 Americans are living in poor air quality or wildfires. And there's now been new research coming out showing the impact of air quality on not just the lung microbiome, but the gut microbiome. And so all of these things that we're breathing in and inhaling, go through our esophagus and into our lungs, and it doesn't just stop there. And so we think a lot about what we're eating, but we also have to think about what we're breathing. But not everyone obviously is dealing with lung dysfunction or has lung issues, but that's the difficulty with the gut is if you've got dysfunction in the gut, you're not always going to just present with GI issues. You may present with skin issues. You may have shortness of breath. You may notice mucus, or you may have gotten sick and it develops into a lung infection. I mean, this is the uniqueness of each and every body.
So let's go through some product highlights because I want to kind of how many product SKUs do you guys have currently?
Currently, we have 3, and we're continuing to grow our innovations. One of the things that we really stand by when I say this sort of deep scientific rigor, again, I think born out of the fact that we have a double board certified neonatologist who wasn't, using supplements and biotics, that, he sort of uses the same, and really when it comes to all of our product development, we use the same sort of pharmaceutical precision or drug level development behind our supplements as we do as someone who's creating a drug. So we do extensive preclinical R&D assays, not just on the biotics, but we also blend specific bioactives from different herbal blends to different vitamin and mineral blends. So whatever we're intending to formulate, let's use our lung probiotic, for example. We have 3 respiratory specific strains. We have an L. acidophilus RSB12, as I mentioned before. And then we also have L. plantarum, RSB11, and an L. rhamnosus, RSB13. And again, these are our individual strains that have been harvested from healthy human microbiomes. And then we've taken turmeric, holy basil, and Vasaka, which are synergistic herbs that have been shown to improve respiratory function, improve immune function. I mean, we're really talking about this sort of immune and gut immune axis because we know our lungs are an immune organ similar to our gut. So we do individual assays on the strains, and interestingly enough, in some of our studies, we saw that the blend of strains actually outperformed the individual strains. So going back to kind of this idea of strain competition, we looked at that. Did one strain outperform another, or did the blend work better? And the blend actually worked better. And then we did the same kind of assays on our herbs. Did one herb outperform another? In fact, the blend worked better, but then we put it together as you would take it in a finished product. And we do all those same assays. We look at different markers from MMP9, which is an enzyme related to tissue breakdown in various parts of the body. We also look at, obviously, microbiome markers and short chain fatty acids, inflammatory markers, things like CRP, both in the sputum as well as in the blood, to make sure that the finished product is actually performing and doing the things that it's intended to do. And this is exactly what goes behind drug development. And so, to Dr. Lal, his sort of message is we are truly trying to change that narrative when it comes to what it means to be an efficacious and high quality product. And that's kind of how we stand behind each and every product that we're developing. So our lung support probiotic has actually been backed by more than 3 published studies on the finished product. Now the actual lung respiratory strains have more studies that they've published, but the finished product, as you would take it, has more than 3 clinical published studies. We've done studies in both asthma and COPD, because these are generally populations that have and characterized by dysbiosis, high proteobacteria, so lots of LPSs. And we've seen improvements from not just short chain fatty acid production to these various inflammatory markers, both in the sputum and in the blood. But we've also seen these strains colonize. And so we saw the strains stick around, which is important for us because it shows not just strain survivability, but also modulation. So really exciting. We've had some incredible, personal conversations. My mother is someone who deals with pretty severe asthma. She's been taking this now for the last 4 or 5 months and has told me, actually just recently, the other day we were talking, and said that she's noticed decreased mucus production, which she's got long-standing asthma and COPD. So
It takes a while to prepare. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Implementing this, like you said, seeding repopulation. We're not real sure of all that, but you can certainly take this probiotic to address those issues. So you have the lung probiotic. It also looks like you have the pre-beat energy probiotic, and then you also have a GLP-1 probiotic. So it looks like you combine the Res-B and the Res-G together a lot. Can you tell me about the pre-beat product, and then what's the synergy of the two together?
Yeah, that's great. So I absolutely love this prebiotic. It's a resistant potato starch, which is a unique prebiotic, one that's digestively friendly. As a practitioner, one of the biggest difficulties in the gastrointestinal space is you have patients that IBS, SIBO, whatever they're dealing with, we always know there's dysbiosis. We know that we have to start to feed the beneficial bacteria, but most of the prebiotics out there, unfortunately, create more gas, more bloating, your fructooligosaccharides, your xylo-oligosaccharides. And so we often have to wait, especially in the lens of like SIBO. And so prebiotics often turn into more of the last step or the final step or a later step when it comes to microbiome modulation and building resiliency. And so what's unique about this resistant potato starch is it's FODMAP friendly, it's digestively friendly, and it's something that can get started right away, because we know fiber, and specifically prebiotics, are the biggest modulator to the gastrointestinal environment. And in improving these microbes, a lot of times when we do stool testing as a clinician and we see that we don't have certain bugs, bifidobacterium, ruminococcus, these really important keystone species, they're there. They're just on life support, right? They're not completely gone, although there have been some bugs that have been followed, and we see an extinction from, indigenous tribes to obviously modern world. But most of these bugs, like even things like Akkermansia, they're there, they're on life support. And so what's really going to bring these bugs back to life is obviously supporting inflammation and all the things we know to do, but you got to feed them. And so the resistant starch is shown to feed beneficial bacteria like your bifidobacterium, like Akkermansia. So it's a really interesting resistant starch that at lower doses, at 3.5 grams, has significant modulation on diversity of microbial diversity and diversity of these key beneficial strains. And then we combine beetroot, which I just love so much. I think beets are having their day. Beets
Making
are
back like cottage cheese.
Yes. Now I absolutely love, this is a side note, but I love pickled beets and cottage cheese together. So
yeah, I know. So right there, it's like powerhouse food.
Yep, sprinkle some sunflower seeds.
Applaud 2024 for making cottage cheese cool again. And maybe 2025 is all about the beet. So
I know. I love it. I never got off this stuff, so I'm glad to know that I'm cool again. But beets are so important. Nitric oxide's becoming so much more talked about it, not just in the microbiome space, but in the oral microbiome space, obviously in the cardiovascular, stamina, mitochondrial support. We know that as women age, we produce less nitric oxide, but beets are also, they're high in betalains and polyphenols that are shown to modulate the microbiome. And there's been some cool studies done that even just after 2 weeks of consuming beetroot extract, that we've seen an increase in key beneficial bacteria. So I think it's awesome. I actually use this as a pre-workout because I want that stamina and that support from nitric oxide production. And then we combine methylated B12. So this becomes not just a digestive support, but what we call the gut energy axis. So improving this sort of gut metabolic brain. When you produce short chain fatty acids, which prebiotics feed your beneficial bacteria to produce short chain fatty acids, butyrate, acetate, propionate. Butyrate binds to certain receptors on your intestinal cells to promote the growth of GLP-1, which of course is so big right now. And most people don't even realize or forget that GLP-1 is produced in the gastrointestinal tract. So it's produced in the gastrointestinal tract, but it's heavily influenced by your microbial signals. So if you have dysbiosis, if you've got dysfunction in the microbiome, then this type of signaling gets disrupted. So we're improving sort of that gut metabolic brain axis, what we call the gut energy axis. And so it's great as that sort of afternoon pickup when you want something but don't want any caffeine. But again, it's supportive to the gut microbiome, and it works well when consuming probiotics because prebiotics and probiotics is what we call symbiotics, help feed one another, right? And so you're feeding the gastrointestinal environment, you're taking these beneficial strains, and then you're targeting these key systems that we know are being impacted by having a dysfunctional or a dysregulated gut microbiome. So I think it's a super cool prebiotic. It's a powder, it's a functional drink. You can use it in cooking. I've got lots of fun recipes that I've created that I think are really enjoyable. My daughter will always say, "Oh, Mom, you're eating your pink yogurt," and it's a beautiful color. So
yeah, the product looks great. I mean, and it's a powder, which is really nice. Is your lung probiotic powders? No, it's capsules.
capsule, yeah.
The GLP-1 product, I mean, obviously, we've had these conversations
Yep.
before about, injectable GLP-1s, GIPs. And while I'm fine with the correct usage of those, I still believe that the gut has to be addressed in order for the body to be able to produce its own level of GLP-1 and GIP, which is why we're metabolically challenged in the first place.
Yep.
So give us a little update on the Res M GLP-1, and this is a postbiotic, which I
Yeah.
think is unique. So tell us about.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this. I think obviously the GLP-1 space is big and we have talked about it. And I think there's a lot of companies that are, focusing on GLP-1. And it just all points back to the root of we have a metabolic problem. 88% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. I think that's a very alarming stat. And we know the microbiome is rooted in metabolic dysfunction. What's unique about the ResM is kind of in the same idea. We're taking the biotics combined with specific bioactives. So we have a postbiotic, again, a purposefully heat treated or a heat inactivated probiotic that we've done various organoid modeling on to really hone in on the various functions of this very specific postbiotic. And this is, again, one of the things I think we're going to start to see a much greater movement towards. I know I'm super excited about the postbiotic space because these are stable. So the whole idea of like, oh, it doesn't survive transit or it's not getting to where it needs to get to. The beauty about postbiotics is that doesn't matter because they're extremely stable. They're not subject to gastric acidity because they're basically, we call them I think that's another fun name, ghost biotics, because they're viable, but they're kind of dead, right? They're in between. So they're really retaining specific function. And that was one of the things that we looked into was, well, what is this doing on our metabolic health? We saw that it promotes improvement to this MMP9, which is an enzyme that gets upregulated when there's tissue breakdown in various parts of the body, the gut, the lungs. And then we looked further at GLP-1 assays and saw that this postbiotic actually does target GLP-1 production and improvement in glucose consumption. So how efficiently your cells are actually taking in glucose and metabolizing it. And so then we did kind of the same sort of testing. We looked at the postbiotic, and then we looked at our bioactive blend, which is white mulberry and fenugreek, which are two very powerful herbs that have been shown to promote appetite regulation, support support our appetite and blood sugar regulation. And so we did the same thing. Are we getting that same sort of activity from the blend of herbs and the individual herbs? And then we looked at what it does together. And it's really exciting. We have our clinical trial underway currently, our human clinical trial, which is essentially how we go. We go from preclinical modeling to human clinical trials. And that hopefully we'll have that data really rounding out over the next couple months. And so looking at various biomarkers from metabolic health to obviously blood sugar to GLP-1 and DPP-4 inhibit activity. And so I'm really excited to kind of see that through and see what the data says, because there actually hasn't been a company out there that's actually really done sort of human clinical trials looking at GLP-1. So it's really exciting to not just innovate when it comes to using these various biotics and blends, but innovate when it comes to the research as well.
Yeah. And I think everyone's just banking on their research out of the gastric bypass industry from 20 some years ago, maybe longer. I can't even remember how long ago, maybe even 30 years ago. We need some updated research on, the microbiota, because we know the long-term effects of gastric bypass depletes the microbiota, so it's not sustainable.
No, and it's interesting, there's been some compelling research in the last, 5 years that's come out around weight loss interventions, and actually has shown, like, if you can modulate and support the health of the gut microbiome, the resiliency within the gut microbiome, you can see more meaningful long-term sustainable results. And I think that's the biggest area of focus when it comes to the GLP-1 medications. And I will tell you, there is so much research underway on the GLP-1 agonist, why certain people respond and to why some people don't. And they've actually linked that back to the gut microbiome, that responders have a different looking signature. And so that's pretty interesting to see. But we also see microbiome changes, post or while being on it. And so it offers a more targeted, personalized approach when working with patients that are looking to lose weight or do have blood sugar dysregulation, that the microbiome has to be part of that intervention toolbox. I've had so many patients, I know I've told you this before, but I've had so many patients that present with fatty liver disease, which we now call, metabolic associated liver. Yeah, it's such a long name now. Blah. Yep, fatty liver disease, which we know is definitely linked back to the gut microbiome, and we see a lot more SIBO in that case. But they're not consuming copious amounts of high fructose corn syrup. They're not eating an extremely high processed foods diet, and you're like, wow, they're fairly normal weight, and you're like, well, what is going on? Why do you have fatty liver? Right. When you're not really falling into that category of someone who you would think. And so that's where you have to actually start to consider the microbiome and what it's doing. And so I think it's a really exciting place to be. And there's not a one size fits all, but how do we look at all these different sort of tools and legs of the stool, from diet to obviously our genetics and our environment, but the microbiome is really part of that understanding.
Gut health sexy again, right? So
I mean, I think some people are doing that, but
yeah. But this is interesting, just the flow of this brand and where it came from and where it is now. So just in the final minutes of this, how would you position this product line clinically into your practice? How would a practitioner listening to this start here? Are there specific targeted audiences, conditions that you would recommend it for? So just give us some clinical application.
Yeah. And so I think when it comes to choosing the right probiotic or choosing the right biotic, obviously we want to look at what is the patient dealing with, right? If there's someone who's presenting with gastrointestinal distress, and where that gastrointestinal stress is obviously manifesting as bloating and constipation and/or diarrhea, we have to start to feed the microbiome. I mean, we know that now with SIBO, with IBS, that these are disorders of gut-brain interaction because we have imbalance. So I often start with the Res-G, which is our pre-beat, our prebiotic. I think that's an incredible thing. I mean, I still see patients, and I almost always put them on it now just because I can. It's digestively friendly, and it's going to start feeding the good bugs. It's a precision prebiotic. But when you look at our kind of individual SKUs, and as we come out with more products, I think of Res-B as like, we joke in our company, but anyone who breathes. But think about that patient who's struggling with some sort of respiratory dysfunction, whether it be asthma or COPD, long COVID, I think of cold and flu season as we get into that, because this is obviously modulating our immune system via the gut microbiome. Obviously, people who, live by air pollution. I mean, I think that's such an important topic these days. We didn't touch on it, but there's some really fascinating research coming out around living near wildfires, the pollution, the air pollutants, that these tiny particles are not just getting into our nasal cavity, but they are infiltrating the lungs, and then they're having an impact, obviously, on the microbiome. And so I know lots of people who are using it around wildfires as a support for lung microbiome health. So I think that, and even more so, we see a lot of sort of autoimmune conditions from, IBD that actually you can start to see gut dysfunction precipitate things like asthma and respiratory distress. And so I think of sort of those patients. And then, of course, our Resm postbiotic, I think this is great as, when you're working on metabolic health. I think there's a lot of products out there because this is a postbiotic. You can use probiotics as well. You can use this in conjunction with GLP-1 medications. The goal is to sort of target the microbiome and modulate it. Maybe we can use it to, help people as they're transitioning off. I think that's such an important area that we work so hard on what people are doing when they're on these GLP-1 medications, but we really have to set these patients up and these clients up for success post medications if they want to start tapering down. And I think that's where these products become so crucial. People who maybe aren't candidates for, and really anyone who just wants to improve their metabolic health and do it in a very, safe and efficacious way.
Very cool. Well, this has been fascinating. I love everything that you guys are doing. We will make available, if Kara is willing to share some of the clinical trials and studies. She'll get those sent over to Courtney, and maybe we can link some of those in the show notes. Otherwise, make sure that you go and get a wholesale account with Resbiotic, as well as add this product line to your Get Healthy store. It's already in the catalog, ready for you as the practitioner to add to your store and start to distribute to the target audiences that you think of. I mean, I'm thinking back to school. I'm thinking the lung probiotic for every child, just to wean off that first 3 weeks of like, let's bring home every sickness possible, and for the parents and for the kids that have asthma. There's a lot of fear with kids going back to school and parents of kids that have very sensitive children with asthma and whatnot. I mean, this is just a great probiotic because even if they're on an albuterol or an inhaler of some sort, they need this in order to help repopulate. So this would be an everyday product, I would think, for kids going back to school, along with a nice little multivitamin, and you probably have a complete system.
You hit the nail on the head. I have a daughter starting a brand new school, and I said that to my husband. I was like, oh my goodness, we're going to be flooded with all this. And so we also are taking Resb because I am like deathly afraid of all these, things that we're going to be exposed to.
You don't want to, you don't want the exposure to hold you down.
Yes, of course.
And that's really what it comes down to, is that, if the whole house goes down, especially if the men get the man colds, it's really hard.
Exactly. So strengthening our immune system is really at the root of this.
That's right. Offset the man colds, everybody. Resb for all. Well, Kara, thanks for being here. Very excited for your new career path and this brand. Thank you so much. Get your wholesale account, add this to your Get Healthy store. And if there is a practitioner, friend, or client that you want to, find out more about this product line, to be able to give it to them, and so they have some, solid science and information, share this with them. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and give us a like on all the socials. Thanks for being here. Kara, any final words for us?
Thank you so much for having me. And like I said, I think it's time. We're living in a really exciting day and age where we can be more precision, we can be more targeted, and I think we do need to challenge companies and the efficacy and quality that goes behind. And so I think, we're doing it very systematically with a lot of precision, but looking at the client as a whole and really formulating those personalized approaches is really important, I think.
Awesome. Again, thanks for being here. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.